Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Chris Guynn, our 2-speed here, and today we are going to go back into our series on hammock camping the Continental Divide Trail, which is a long distance hiking trail in America which goes from the border of Mexico to the border of Canada through New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, and finally it finishes up in Glacier Park. This video is going to be based around a 5 tips type of video, so I'm going to give you 5 tips to hammock camp the CDT. Don't worry, I'm going to index them so you can go to whichever tip you would like to look at. If you want to skip the others, that's fine. Before we get started, I just want to let you know if you like these videos, please like and subscribe, and I'll make more of them on hammock camping in general or hammock camping the CDT. So let's begin. The first tip I'm going to give you is the basics of hammock camping for when you go on the Continental Divide Trail. You need to make sure you have your hammock setup dialed in to where you are very comfortable with it and you're able to set it up in odd situations, at odd times, at night, when it's raining, when it's bad weather, because there are a lot of trails or places you can camp to where there's a little bit of room for error if you set it up wrong and you get soaking wet or things like that. I remember there was a time on the AT, I remember I set my tarp up perpendicular to a hill and it rained that night and one of the tarp corners got jerked out and I woke up with rain pounding me in the face and had to get up in the dark and chase a tarp corner. And on the AT that's probably okay, you get wet, you're going to be okay, you're going to dry out, you're wet most of the time on the AT anyways. But when you do the Continental Divide Trail, there are areas where you're going to be at elevation. It's going to be very risky if you get everything soaking wet, including your sleeping bag. So it's very important to make sure you have thoroughly shaken down your hammock equipment and your normal equipment and make sure that you're 100% sure that you can set it up to where your tarp is not going to leak, you're not going to wake up and have your butt on the ground and get everything wet. And so that's the first tip that I want to give you. Like I said, it's very important on the CDT because when you see a hammock spot, you're going to have to capitalize on that hammock spot or you're going to have to sleep on the ground, which is something we'll talk about later. I'm going to post some links and resources to help you with that. One of the resources that I'll post is the Ultimate Hang. It's a book that gives you some information about hammocking and how to hang up your hammock and things like that. And I'll also post my CDT hammock setup video so you can see what worked well for me on the CDT in 2021. Next we're going to go to item 2, which is an item a lot of people don't like to talk about when they hammock camp, and that's going to ground. On the CDT you need to have the hammock set up to be able to go to ground at any time. And by any time I mean if you don't reach where you want to camp that night, if there's a spot to where above elevation and you just have to find a spot to camp, or if the weather rolls in, which it occasionally does on the CDT and it's just so terrible you need to find a spot to hunker down and get ready. And for this, with your hammock setup, you're going to need a moisture barrier on the ground. I use Polycro for mine. You can use Tyvek. There are a lot of different options. Just make sure you find the best one for you. And that's really important to keep your sleeping bag and everything else you have from getting wet when you sleep on the ground. And also there are a lot of good resources for this tip. And I'll post them in the comment section below. There's a YouTube video from Shug where he talks about setting your tarp up on the ground. There's another great article from the Long Distance Hiker where he talks about his all-terrain setup. But this goes back to step 1. Make sure that if you're going to use your ground setup that you're able to set it up very easily with the setup that you have, and that includes your rigging for your tarp. Make sure you have trekking poles to set your tarp up. If you want to hike without trekking poles, it's going to be a little bit harder. You may have to find some sticks or something like that, which are going to be super hard to find or in that elevation. For the CDT, if you're going to hammock camp, I recommend taking trekking poles and using trekking poles. And from my experience, 95% of the people on the CDT had trekking poles, so that shouldn't be a big issue. Next, number 3 is going to be carry extra long straps. This goes back into the item 1 to be very familiar with your hammock setup. The CDT has a few hammock spots, but there are a few of them that you have to be very creative when you get to it. Either the trees are going to be fairly large or they're going to be really far apart. In my experience, the trees are pretty far apart, and so a good set of long straps really helped. I used 12-foot straps. That's what I would recommend that you take. I did a short video on the suspension that I use. I'll link that below, and also put a link to where you can buy those straps if you'd like to get those straps for yourself. Extra long straps, they increase your chances of being able to hammock camp and not have to sleep on the ground. Item number 4 has to deal with topo maps, and topo maps are going to be your friend if you want to hike the CDT and hammock camp. Make sure you download them on your phone, whatever app you use. I used Guthook's guide when I hiked the CDT. They worked really well. I'll post a picture below and you could see kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for a nice green area. You can look at the elevation. Sometimes when it goes down in elevation a little bit, you'll be able to get out of the tree line, get back into the tree line, and that's what you're looking for when you're hammock camping, is a nice little spot inside the tree line so you can camp there, wake up the next morning, and hopefully get through the exposed area back to another area that's really great. And this really helps for finding a nice area that's not exposed. Even if you're not a hammock camper, make sure you have your topo maps, because you don't want to camp somewhere to where if the weather blows in, it's going to be very aggressive against your tent, especially if you have a non-freestanding tent. The wind can just destroy those things just as well as it can destroy a hammock tarp, or maybe a tarp if you're tarp camping. Tip number 5, there are 2 areas that having a tent may increase how enjoyable your CDT hike is. The first area is going to be from the border of New Mexico, Mexico to Silver City, New Mexico. This area is known for being rugged, dry, barren, little water, little shade. It's very hard to find hammock spots in this area. You can do it, but they're few and far in between. What I recommend in this area if you want to hammock camp is to make sure you have your go to ground set up and just hammock camp under the stars, looking at the stars as you're laying there at night in the New Mexico desert. It's one of the best experiences I had on the CDT. Highly recommend this section, doing this section with cowboy camping, and just have your hammock set up ready for after you get north of Silver City. You'll start to see some trees and you'll be able to find a good area to hang your hammock and enjoy a good night's sleep. The next section that you may want to carry a tent on, which I actually do recommend carrying a tent on, is the basin in Wyoming. It's the desert basin, and it is dry, hot, there's no shade, and the main reason why I would encourage you to take a tent on this is the weather. It can get very windy. If the weather blows in, it's just super aggressive, and for me a tent was just the best option. It's really easy to set up. You could hike really long days, get in your tent, and that would be it. And for me, I actually went through this section fairly quickly, and I started with my tent in Encampment, Wyoming, and I think like a week and a half later I was in Lander, Wyoming, and I got my hammock set up back and I sent my tent back home, and it was really nice. I'll post some pictures below that you'll be able to see how barren and rugged this area is. Those are the 2 sections I recommend carrying a tent on, and you can do it without carrying a tent and just do your go to ground setup, but it may not be that enjoyable in the basin. But as always, your mileage may vary. Okay, and that's my 5 tips for hammock camping the Continental Divide Trail. These are the tips that help me out. If you have any tips for this trail that you'd like to share below, please let me know. And if there are any other videos you'd like to see related to the Continental Divide Trail or hammock camping in general, please let me know below, and make sure you like and subscribe. Thank you.